As the storm raged, the rain fell heavily on the roof of the small Louisiana house. Inside, an old man brings a small piece of technology to his tired and withered neck. Injecting himself, he's interrupted by the ringing of his doorbell. Moving slowly, his tired and frail body burdened by the relentless and unchanging passage of time, he makes his way over and answers the door. Opening it, he finds a young woman, drenched from the rain. After asking if he could help her, he ushers her inside, away from the chaotic weather. Noticing she has an injury on her forehead, to which she replies she must have just scraped a branch. As he fetched the first aid kit, he asks what she was doing all the way out there in the middle of the bayou. She's introduced as Melanie, an aspiring writer who has admired his work for many years, as he is the Jake Sisko. As he gently treats her wound, she tells him that she's surprised that he's not written more books and that she could find so little of his work. She had read Anselm and couldn't put it down. She read it twice in one night, almost wishing she hadn't read it at all, so she could read it again for the first time. Jake gave a soft and knowing smile, stating, "You only ever get one first time and one last time for everything." It was something that he thought about at his age. She wanted to know why he hadn't written in so long. He chuckled, deflecting with a little humour. He says he lost his favourite pen and simply couldn't get any work done without it. His eyes filled with a quiet pain. He admits that if she had come yesterday, or even a week ago, he would have turned her away. But now, maybe it's finally the perfect time to tell this story. He was going to take her back to when he was 18, to a time when his world became shattered. The moment when the worst thing that could happen to a young man happened to him. He lost his father. Jake's story begins with a flashback to Deep Space Nine, many years earlier. Jake is deeply focused on writing a short story. His father, Captain Sisko, notices how intensely absorbed Jake has become and decides to try and break him out of this creative isolation he found himself in by taking him on a small excursion to the wormhole to watch it undergo what was known as a subspace inversion, something that only happens once every 50 years. Even on the Defiant, Jake remains fixated, almost obsessed with finishing his story. Sisko offers him some advice, that if he was a writer, every now and then he'd want to poke his head up from what he was doing, take a look around, see what was happening in the world, because it's life, and you can miss it if you don't open your eyes. Finally persuaded to step out of his narrative bubble, the ship is suddenly jolted by the shockwaves as the wormhole begins its inversion. But there's a problem. The Defiant's warp core power output spikes alarmingly. Unable to get through to engineering, Sisko decides to head down and investigate, instructing Jake to stay where he was. Normally, Jake would follow the instructions without question, but something that day told him he'd be safer with his father. In the engine room, Jake finds chaos. Sisko is tending to an injured crewman, when Dax comes over the comms with a warning that the core will explode if it's not realigned immediately. Sisko jumps into action, momentarily disappointed to see that Jake has ignored his instruction, but quietly relieved as he has an extra pair of hands in the crisis. Sisko instructs Jake to retrieve the necessary tool as the core begins discharging energy. With no other option, Sisko takes a desperate risk. He successfully channels the excess energy through the Defiant's deflector array, and everything starts to settle down. But just as things seem under control, an energy discharge strikes Jake and Sisko, knocking Jake to the ground. Helplessly, Jake watches as his father is enveloped by the energy. Sisko vanishes, seemingly atomized by the energy. In the blink of an eye, Jake's father was gone. Old man Jake recalls the memorial service held for his father on Deep Space Nine. One by one, people stood up to speak of how much Sisko meant to them. Jake, however, chose not to speak. He knew that whatever he said, he'd always feel like he'd never said enough. In the weeks and months that followed, Jake felt lonelier than ever. Despite the support of people around him, life began to return to normal for everyone except Jake. He lay in bed each night, restless and uncertain about his future, whether he'd stay on Deep Space Nine or return to Earth to attend the Pennington School for Writing. On one of those restless nights, a sudden flash fills the room. Sitting up, Jake can barely believe his eyes. He sees Sisko laying on the floor of his quarters, asking what's happened. But before Jake can fully grasp what's going on, Sisko once again vanishes into thin air. After convincing himself that his father's apparition was probably just a dream, Jake tried to put the experience behind him and move on. About 8 months passed and the war with the Klingons was going poorly. In the absence of their emissary, the Bajorans had signed a mutual defense pact with the Cardassians, a move that angered the Klingons. People were leaving DS9 in droves, but Jake wasn't going anywhere. As he strolled through the corridors of Deep Space Nine one day, another bright flash lit up behind him. He turned to the corner, and to his amazement, he saw his father laying on the ground again. Racing over, he grabbed Sisko's hand. It was real. His father was back, but something was wrong. Sisko was phasing in and out of existence. The crew scrambled to find a way to stabilize him. For Sisko, no time had passed at all. Jake, overcome with emotion, broke down as his father asked him how he'd been. But before they could say too much, Sisko began to fade once again. Jake could do nothing as his father vanished, leaving nothing but an empty bed. Old man Jake winces as he recounts the pain of knowing that his father wasn't truly gone, but trapped somewhere, just out of reach. Concerned, Melanie suggests that he rests and she should come back later. But Jake refuses, explaining there won't be any other time. He's dying. Jake continues recounting the story. The situation with the Klingons had gotten worse. Recreating the accident that led to his father's disappearance was impossible, since the wormhole wouldn't undergo another inversion for decades. When Starfleet eventually abandoned the sector to the Klingons, Jake was forced to leave Deep Space Nine. He spent his days drifting around Earth and eventually enrolled in the Pennington School, later moving to Louisiana to be closer to his grandfather. It was there that he wrote Anselm, and during this time he met a woman, got married, and built a quiet life. After a visit from his old friend Nog, Jake was working on a new novel when he is coaxed away by his wife And just as Jake asks her if she'd like to do the new cover art design for his book, there is once again a flash of light. Jake went to investigate and is amazed to find his father laying on the living room floor. With Starfleet science on their way, Jake introduces his father to his wife, Kurn, and Sisko, delighted by all that has changed, eagerly began catching up. Kurn shows Sisko the books that Jake has written, and Jake, emotional, admitted that he'd given up hope of ever seeing his father again. Sisko reassured him, telling him he was immensely proud of all that he had accomplished. Just as before, Sisko vanished again. Dax had eventually realized that the accident created a subspace tether between Sisko and Jake. With Dax's calculations, it was possible to predict when Sisko might reappear. Determined to save his father, Jake put down his pen, left his writing career, and pursued a degree in subspace mechanics. He wanted to understand the tether and find a way to bring his father back for good. Initially, his wife, Kurn, was patient and supportive, but Jake grew increasingly consumed by his studies and the mission to rescue his father. Sadly, his marriage fell apart. Years later, as the wormhole approached its next inversion, it was finally possible to recreate the conditions of the accident. With high hopes, Jake and the crew made an attempt. They successfully locked onto Sisko's signature, but the tether pulled Jake into a strange subspace layer. Face to face with his father, Jake tells him that he was trying to save him. Sisko, however, was heartbroken to hear that Jake had put his life on hold. He urged Jake to let go, pleading with him to live his life to the fullest and find happiness, if not for himself, then for his father. Overcome with emotion, Jake breaks, and moments later, he's pulled back to the Defiant, alone. Jake's rescue had failed. With the storm and the darkness of the bayou past, a new day was revealed. Old Jake gives Melanie a collection of his most recently written stories that he wrote after he decided to honor his father's request and move on with his life. Jake explains that Sisko is stuck in one fixed point in time, the moment of the accident. The link between them acts like an elastic cord, stretching until it's taut enough to pull Sisko temporarily into Jake's time. However, if Jake were to die when the link was at its weakest, the connection would break, leaving Sisko stranded in subspace forever. However, if Jake could sever the cord when Sisko appeared, Sisko would return to the moment of the accident. The realization hits Melanie, who states, "You're going to cut the cord, aren't you?" Jake responds, "Yes." Jake makes her promise that as she studies his stories, she should stop every now and then, take a look around, see what's going on. It's life, Melanie. To which she responds, "You can miss it if you don't open your eyes." She kisses Jake in farewell and leaves him alone with his thoughts. Jake waits for his father's return, grasping a new story he'd been working on and his father's baseball, and he drifts into sleep. When he wakes, his father is there, kneeling beside him, smiling. Jake tells Sisko that he's been expecting him. His father picks up the story that Jake has written, marveling at his son's return to writing. Jake asks him to read the dedication. It reads, to my father, who's coming home. Jake explains the truth about the link and his intentions to sever it, sending Sisko back. Alarmed, Sisko protests. No, Jake, you could still have so many years. You don't have to do this. Not for me. Jake replies, for you, and for the boy that I was. Because don't you see, we're going to get a second chance. As Jake dies in his father's arms, Sisko is transported back to the Defiant, where he dodges the energy discharge just in time. He embraces his young son, and Jake, dazed but unharmed, asks if he's okay. And with a slight tremble in his voice, Sisko replies, I am now, Jake. I am now. At its heart, The Visitor is a sincerely emotional story about the love between a father and his son, and the lengths to which one will go to preserve that bond. Jake Sisko's life becomes a narrative of devotion, loss, and sacrifice as he spends decades trying to save his father from an anomaly that trapped him in the temporal version of purgatory. Jake's inability to move on with his life is a reflection of how loss can consume someone, how the past can become a prison, preventing someone from living fully in the present. The episode effectively shows how Jake's need to save his father becomes the central force in his life, costing him his career, his marriage, and his happiness. The recurring motif of time throughout the episode plays a significant role in its overall impact. Captain Sisko's intermittent appearances are a bittersweet reminder of how time is always slipping away, and how easily moments with those we care about can vanish. For Jake, every brief reunion is painful because it rekindles hope, but always leaves him devastated when his father is torn away. The brief, sporadic appearances of his father throughout Jake's life mirror the way people often experience loss in reality. Small, poignant reminders of someone who is no longer there, through memories, dreams, old habits, and physical objects. Jake's realization that he can never truly live his life while his father remains lost in time symbolizes the way grief can hold people in a limbo of their own, unable to move forward. His obsession with the past prevents him from maintaining a future, making the emotional arc of the episode tragic yet relatable. While the episode largely focuses on Jake's journey, it also sheds light on Sisko's role as a father and the emotional toll his situation takes on him. Trapped in this timeless state, a passive participant in Jake's life, forced to watch as his son grows older, suffers, and gives up everything in the pursuit of his rescue. The emotional burden of knowing his son's life is being consumed by this rescue mission becomes almost unbearable for him. This dynamic adds layers to Sisko's character beyond his role as a Starfleet captain. He's more vulnerable here than we've seen before, not in control of the situation and grappling with feelings of helplessness. Sisko wants Jake to live his life, to move forward, but he's powerless to stop the cycle of pain that keeps bringing him back into Jake's world. The Visitor is widely regarded as one of the finest episodes of Deep Space Nine and the wider Star Trek franchise. It resonates with anyone who has experienced loss and the grief that surrounds death, but also depicts the all too common lack of closure that can come with loved ones that go missing and are never found. The episode's writing and direction is solid, and the performances not only from Tony Todd and Avery Brooks, but also Rachel Robinson, who happens to be the daughter of Andrew Robinson, are superb and thought-provoking, leaving a performance that will stay with viewers long after the credits roll. And as I make this video, I have awoken to the news that Tony Todd has passed away, a superb actor and someone that I'm very, very grateful to for giving his contribution to this episode that I absolutely love. Now, watching this episode with my father for the very first time all those years ago created a core memory that can never be forgotten. I remember when it was finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It sparked a conversation that lasted hours about the nature of existence, the passage of time, and the subject of loss. How his own father had died before I was born, and way too soon before his time. The impact of that moment and the difficulties dealing with the stages of grief. We had so many discussions like this, and every time we did, I savoured it like a fine wine. Little did I know at that point that I too would lose my own father well before his time. The feelings of grief that continue to hit me to this day, the loss of the strength that my father gave me throughout my life, and the acceptance that I would never again see him, made this video one of the more difficult ones to make. Rewatching this episode and making this video has made me realise that even now, 4 years later, like Jake, I too have not fully accepted the loss myself, and that I am in some ways still holding on and not moving on. That's the power of storytelling. That's the power of Star Trek. Goodbye, old man. I miss you.